Hi, I'm Sandra, and I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal a family could serve, until my own son-in-law stood before everyone and stripped me of my dignity with a smile. They called me the driver's lady, whispered I didn't belong in my husband's house, erased my name like I'd never existed. But that night, when the man they all dismissed walked in wearing a general's medal, the silence in that ballroom could have cut through bone. You ever watch someone choke on their own pride? I don't much care for big houses with tall ceilings. They echo when folks walk. Like the walls ain't sure if they supposed to hold memories or just hold sound. Driving up Willow Creek that evening, I passed by streets that used to hum with music, real music. Saxophones crying from stoops, barbecue smoke curling up into the trees. Now it's yoga studios and organic cafes with glass walls. Nobody looks up from their phone long enough to notice the world they paved over. Kamaya's place stood like a monument. Gray stone, 3-car garage, lawn clipped close like it was afraid to grow wild. I pulled up slow, watching my reflection disappear in the polished windows. It looked like success, but it felt cold, like something built to impress strangers. Not welcome family. Mars, sitting quiet in the passenger seat, turned off the gospel station just as Mahalia Jackson hit a note that almost cracked my heart open. I missed the rest of that note the whole night. We stepped out. I carried the peach cobbler. He took the sweet tea and macaroni. He ain't say much, just followed behind while I rang the bell. Kamaya opened the door with that smile she uses when company coming, polite but distant. Her arms wrapped around me, tight but brief, like a hug timed for efficiency. Mama, you made it. Watch the carpet, please. Inside, the smell of fried catfish didn't quite cover the citrus candles burning in every room. She guided me toward the kitchen like a museum tour guide, pointing out the open concept and the new backsplash. When I set the dishes down, she tapped my arm lightly. Could you not use the plastic containers next time? The glass ones just match better. Langston came in, tall and smiling, with a voice like warm syrup that cooled too quick. Sandra, looking radiant as always, he said, his eyes already scanning over me like a catalog. He leaned in like he meant it, but his hands never touched my shoulders. You know how to make an entrance. Grandkids rushed by, wrapped in laughter and sugar. One of them called me Grandma and kept running. I reached out to touch her braid but missed. All around, people chatted, sipped wine, clinked plates. It was a celebration, but no one asked me how I'd been. Kamaya led me to a seat by the kitchen door, not at the table with the centerpiece and candles, but where folks pass through. I smiled anyway. What else was there to do? Langston stood to toast, lifting his glass high, to family, old and new, and to the journey of building something greater than what we came from. Laughter, applause. Then he added, success takes discipline, self-reliance, and maybe just a dash of Southside grit. His eyes found mine with a flicker of amusement. We all start somewhere, right? Even from those kitchens with broken burners and warm Pepsi. More laughter. Somebody clapped too hard. I raised my glass halfway. They thought they were laughing at the past. I whispered inside, but that past had a name. It was me. Mars didn't laugh. He looked at me, just for a second, and I saw something, not pity. Recognition. Then came the photos. Langston dimmed the lights, and Kamaya clicked the remote. The screen filled with polished images, charity galas, ribbon cuttings, Langston in tailored suits, Kamaya handing out turkeys on Thanksgiving. I waited for a photo of family, maybe Kamaya in pigtails. Maybe my old kitchen. Then it flashed. Me. Blurry, in the background, tray in hand, mid-blink, Kamaya's voice floated up. Mama always insists on helping in the kitchen. She loves it. They laughed again. I didn't. They dressed my silence in gratitude and called it love. I stayed still, even as the air shifted around me. Back when Kamaya was 7, I used to part her hair into sections before church, humming while her small hands held my wrist. Don't pull, Mama, she'd say. I'd kiss her forehead. Now she held her wine glass like it might break if someone touched it wrong. Somewhere between good intentions and better neighborhoods, I became background, a story told in past tense. The slideshow ended. The lights came back on. Kamaya was laughing, her hand on Langston's chest. I reached for my coat. Mars was already there, holding it open, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, don't let them write your story for you." I looked at him, confused, then noticed the tag on his wrist, an old military ID. Scratched and dull, but still proud. Outside, the night had cooled, but something inside me had warmed, just enough to stand taller. The drive home was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind where your thoughts get loud enough to make your ears ring. I sat in the front seat, arms crossed, staring out the window as Atlanta's lights blurred past. Mars didn't say much, he just drove, slow and steady, like he wasn't in a rush to outrun anything. Langston's voice was still bouncing around in my head. That smug little toast he made. Even from old kitchens on the south side. Funny how a man can smile and still gut you with his words. He laughed. They all did, and none of them knew they were laughing at me. The only sound in the car came from the low hum of jazz. Not the smooth, commercial kind, real stuff. With horns that cried and drums that took their time. It wrapped around the silence. Gave it shape. I noticed then, when a street lamp hit just right. A dull glint against Mars' chest. A metal, worn down, edges scratched like it had been through some things. I remembered Langston snorting earlier when Mars stayed quiet. A man who don't talk must not have anything to say. That line hit me different now. Sitting in the silence with a man who didn't speak unless it meant something made me wonder. Maybe it's the loud ones who ain't got much to offer. Maybe noise is just camouflage for emptiness. We pulled into my driveway. Porch light still flickering, like it had been for weeks. I didn't bother fixing it. Mars got out, walked over to open my door without a word. I stepped out slow, bones stiff but head held high. Inside, the house welcomed me in the way only an old house can. Like it remembered you even when you forgot yourself. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and turned toward the kitchen when I finally asked, "That metal, what's the story behind it?" Mars hesitated. I could see it in the way he touched it. Thumb grazing the surface like it held weight only he could feel. "Desert Storm," he said, voice low. "Lost a few good men. Came back, spent time training boys in the city. Helping them stay out the system." He looked at me fully then. "I wasn't hired. Your husband and I served together. When he passed, some of the folks we worked with sent me to check in. That's all." I just stood there. He wasn't a driver. He wasn't anyone's servant. He was family my daughter never asked about. And Langston? Langston didn't even care enough to look him in the eye when he handed him my keys. He assumed Mars was beneath him. Just another shadow standing by the door. The real insult wasn't the slideshow or the seat near the kitchen. It was being invisible. It was how not even my daughter noticed when I went quiet. When I stopped finishing my sentences. When I started folding into myself to avoid stepping on anyone's fancy carpet. Earlier this week, Kamaya had texted me, said, "Mama, let's keep the dinner light. Okay? No old stories." When did my truth become something to be embarrassed by? I must have been staring at the wall too long because Mars asked gently, "You all right?" I nodded. "I'm just remembering things nobody else seems to care about." He didn't interrupt, just nodded once. It was the first time in a long while someone let me speak without correcting me halfway through. His eyes drifted to the corner of the living room. "That your old record player?" I followed his gaze. The thing was collecting dust. Hadn't been touched in over a year. I walked over, brushed my fingers along the top, opened the cabinet and pulled out a vinyl. Nina Simone, "Ain't Got Number, I Got Life." The needle crackled before the music started. Then her voice poured out, sharp and rich, and I laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A real laugh, the kind that starts in your belly and catches you off guard. "They think I'm just tired bones and old habits," I said, "but I remember who I was. And I ain't done yet." Mars smiled, not with his mouth, but his whole face softened. Before he left, he reached into his coat and handed me something folded. "Some people collect medals," he said, "others wear scars. Either way, we earn our peace." I nodded, took the paper. After he closed the door, I unfolded it slow, Inside was just that line. Handwritten. Nothing else. I placed it next to a photo of me in my 20s, pressed hair. Fire in my eyes. Baby Kamaya on my hip. I sat down, looked at the photo. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like disappearing. Sunday morning came soft and slow. Light peeked through the blinds. Dust dancing like it had its own rhythm. I moved through my routine, coffee brewing. Blinds drawn open. A glance at the same photo frame on the windowsill. Same steps, but something inside felt different. Not loud, just sharper, like a knife that had been dulled too long and finally met a whetstone. I kept thinking about that dinner. Not just the words, but the in-betweens, how Kamaya avoided my eyes. How Langston's friends whispered behind their wine glasses. I'd missed it in the moment. I'd trained myself not to look too closely. Not to take offense. Not to make a fuss. Silence has a sound, I said out loud to no one. It hums in the throat of every woman who chose peace over pride. Mars's note sat folded by the kettle. I hadn't moved it since he handed it to me. I read it again. Some people collect medals. Others wear scars. Either way, we earn our peace. It lingered in my mind like a hymn. I started questioning myself, not with shame, but clarity. Maybe I'd taught Kamaya how to survive, how to move in rooms where you weren't invited. But maybe I forgot to teach her how to stand when they try to rewrite your worth. That thought settled deep. I hadn't stepped into a church in months. But today, I felt like I needed to hear something older than my doubts. Not for forgiveness, just to remember what it felt like to sing without fear. Later that morning, I drove to the old church downtown. The bricks were cracked, but the spirit was still alive in there. Gospel music rolled out the doors before I even stepped inside. I was greeted with hugs and soft laughs from women who'd worn grief like church hats, laid-off teachers. Widows, grandmothers raising second generations. They smelled like cocoa butter and resilience. Reverend Booker was in mid-sermon. His voice filled every corner. Don't mistake a quiet woman for a weak one. The Lord moves slow, but he moves sure. I sat in the third pew. My hands folded tight. His words didn't fix anything, but they mirrored the storm inside me. After service, folks gathered outside. That's when I saw Mars. He was standing with Reverend Booker, listening more than talking. Like always, Booker noticed me and smiled. You know, Mars been with us for years. He said, helped more veterans find housing than I can count. Quiet man, but when the church was drowning in debt, someone paid it off in full. Took us months to find out it was him. I looked at Mars. He didn't flinch, didn't boast, just kept his eyes soft. That struck something. I'd been treating pain like something to hide, while he turned his into work, into help. He said, they call me quiet, but my silence carries names. That line stayed with me the whole drive back home. The sun was already low by the time I got in. I'd barely taken off my shoes when the knock came. Kamaya stood there, holding a foil-covered tray. Leftovers, she said, like it was supposed to fix something. I let her in. We sat at the table like strangers trying to remember how to be family. She didn't waste time. You embarrassed me, she said, her voice sharp. Sitting with him, the driver. I looked her dead in the eye. Funny, the only one who didn't embarrass me that night was him. She blinked, taken aback. You always do this. You twist things. Langston said people asked who he was. He told them Mars was your caregiver. He didn't want them to think you needed help. I sat up straighter. So now being respected means pretending I'm helpless? Her mouth opened, then closed. She couldn't answer that. I stood. Next time someone writes my story, I'll be holding the pen. She didn't say goodbye when she left. Just walked out like she was the one betrayed. That night, I sat at the kitchen table. Pulled out the Nina Simone record again. This time, I sang along. Not loud, but steady. I looked at my phone. Thumb hovering. Then I typed. How do you make pain useful? Mars replied within minutes. By not wasting it. The roses needed pruning. I'd let them go too long. Buds blooming on dying branches. Roots pushing against dry soil. Out in that little patch of garden behind my house. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't have to explain myself. Just gloves, clippers, and time. I knelt beside the hydrangeas, fingers brushing dirt like it was silk. There was something holy about working with your hands, something nobody could take from you. While I worked, my mind wandered back to Kamaya as a girl, sitting cross-legged on the porch, asking questions faster than I could answer them. And me, always saying, yes, baby, even when my whole body screamed no. I clipped a thorned stem. Flowers don't bloom where roots are broken. I whispered, people ain't much different. Somewhere between the weeds and sunlight, I realized I hadn't just tolerated the disrespect. I'd trained them in it, smiled through their dismissals, laughed off their erasures, let it slide, over and over, out of love, out of habit. Maybe the things we let slide were never small. Later that day, Kamaya texted. She wanted to meet for coffee. Said it casual, just to catch up. I knew what that meant. A performative peace offering, her way of smoothing over the cracks without naming them. We met at some trendy cafe downtown. All glass walls and succulents. The kind of place where folks whisper more than they talk. She was already seated, nails perfect, phone in hand like it was glued there. I know it's been weird, she started. I just want us to go back to normal. I sipped my coffee. Define normal. She blinked, smiled too wide, then launched into talk about Langston's promotion. Some barbecue they were planning. The usual carousel of polished details. Then came the real reason. So, about the barbecue, she said, smoothing her blouse. Would you mind if Mars didn't come? It's just, the guest list is kind of curated this time. We're trying to keep a certain image. That's when I felt it. Not anger, not even shock, just a slow, quiet snap. Like a thread finally giving way after years of tension. You think dignity comes with a price tag? I said, calm. I stopped buying that lie years ago. She laughed, nervous. Mama, don't make this about you. No, baby, I said, I'm just finally making things about truth. I didn't say yes or no to the barbecue. Just stood, gathered my things, and left her sitting there in her curated space. But just as I reached the car, I heard her behind me, not calling my name, talking into her phone. She's been off lately, she said. We just manage her. I froze. Not because it hurt, but because I realized she didn't see me anymore. Not really, just the version of me they'd polished down over the years, muted. Palatable, soft around the edges. I leaned against the car, letting the metal cool my back. Not from weakness, just to stay still long enough to catch my breath. I texted Mars. Ever feel like the world made a mask out of your kindness? He replied fast, yes, but some of us choose when to take it off. That night, I opened the bottom drawer in my bedroom. One I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a thick manila envelope, labeled in my handwriting, for when I remember who I am. Inside, letters, a deed, and one document Kamaya thought no longer existed. I had let too many things slide. But this would not be one of them. It wasn't a phone call. Not even a text. Just a cold, tidy email from Kamaya's assistant account. One I didn't even know she used for family. Your presence is requested at the Jenkins home for a family gathering. Friday, 6 p.m. sharp. Backyard attire suggested. No warmth. No, hi, Mama. Not even a, hope you're well. Just a calendar event dressed up like an olive branch. Mars saw it before I said a word. You don't owe them anything. Sandra. I shook my head. Sometimes you show up not because you're welcome, but because silence would be louder. I made my peach cobbler that morning. From scratch, fresh peaches, my mama's cast iron, the kind of cobbler that's layered in memory. Not shortcuts, a quiet reminder that I still had something worth bringing to the table. On the drive over, I rehearsed words in my head. Not speeches, just truths. I didn't know if I was going to fight or forgive, but I knew I was done pretending. When I arrived, the driveway was full of Range Rovers and polished BMWs. That kind of polished that said, leased, more than, owned. I stepped out with my cobbler and a straight spine. The backyard was already full. Langston's frat brothers. Some church ladies I barely recognized. Kamaya's co-workers who never looked me in the eye. Mom, Kamaya said, waving me over like a background extra. Glad you could make it. I handed her the cobbler. No thanks. Just a nod. And it was gone. Shuffled next to store-bought potato salad that got 3 compliments in 10 minutes. Kamaya introduced me to a group near the patio. This is my mom. She raised me alone. She means well. That landed like a pebble in the throat. Small, but stuck. Langston's mother, dressed in pearls like it was Easter, let out a loud laugh from across the yard. Sandra, you still driving around that raggedy old thing? Every eye turned to me, waiting for the smile, the shrug, the usual dodge. I said, it gets me where truth lives. Can your Lexus say the same? The group went quiet, like someone turned down the volume. At dinner, the talk turned to legacy. Success. Curated lives. Langston bragged about an upcoming gala at some military academy. Kamaya looked at me and said, too lightly, we might have to ask you to skip this one. Mom, it's very elite. I set my fork down gently. I raised a daughter, I said, not loud, but steady, not a brand. Don't confuse the two. She blinked, then forced a laugh. And that's when a cousin passed her phone down the table. Look at this photo Kamaya posted. Y'all look perfect. There we were, all smiles at the last family reunion. Except, I wasn't in it. My face had been cropped clean out. Just arms and a blur. Must have been formatting. Kamaya mumbled. No one met my eyes. I stood, excused myself, walked out back to the fence line. The air hit different there. Real, still. I let it hold me for a second. They want me quiet, I thought. Decor, a token. But I've got a voice that raised generations. Mars called. You all right? I'm seeing them clearly, I said. That's the real gift tonight. I didn't go back in right away. I pulled out my phone. Sent Kamaya a photo, one from when she was 7, crying on the school steps after a bully pushed her. I was kneeling, arms wrapped around her tight. Caption. I showed up then. I'll show up now, just differently. I re-entered the house slow, calm. Walked straight to Langston. Handed him a small velvet box. The one that had lived in my top drawer for over 30 years. Since it's about legacy tonight, this belonged to someone who actually earned his medals. His jaw tightened, no smile this time. And that look on his face? That's when I knew, the war had just begun. I woke up before the birds that Saturday. Not because I was restless, but because something in me knew, it was time. The sun slipped through the curtains. Quiet but clear. I didn't reach for coffee. Or my slippers. I went straight to that envelope. That same manila envelope I'd shoved in the kitchen drawer after all hell broke loose last month. I pulled it out and sat down at the dining table. Laid every sheet across the wood like pieces to a puzzle I was finally ready to finish. A property deed, a contract, a letter from Langston, all of it. I held silence for years. I whispered, but silence didn't protect me, it buried me. There was no panic in my chest this time. No second guessing. Just that slow burning clarity that comes when you stop pretending it'll get better on its own. I picked up my phone and sent one line. I need you here, not for me, but for truth. About 40 minutes later, Jarius knocked on the door. He didn't come in with that usual lawyer air. No briefcase, no clipboard, just his arms open wide. I let him hug me longer than usual. Truth be told, I needed that. We sat at the table. And I slid everything in front of him. He didn't rush, just read, eyebrows low, lips tight. When he finally looked up, he said, they've been rewriting your history. My throat felt tight, but I nodded. I thought staying quiet would make them remember who I am. But all it did was help them forget faster. He pointed at a line on the deed. This signature here? That's not legal. The notarization's wrong. Title records don't match. I already looked into it after what you told me last week. I looked him in the eye. So I got a shot? He leaned back in his chair. Not just a shot. You've got a case. But we play this smart. No yelling. No threats. Paper trails only. For the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders drop. Not because the storm was over, but because I had someone willing to hold the umbrella with me. Before noon, I called Kamaya. Told her I made lunch. Said I wanted to talk. She came over like nothing was wrong. holding that fake little smile she used when she didn't want questions. I fixed her plate. We sat in the kitchen like old times. Fish frying, collards steaming, but the silence between us was louder than any prayer. Midway through her meal, I asked, "You remember when I signed over the house?" She barely blinked. "Yeah, you said it was time. That you wanted to let go." I sat my fork down. "That ain't how I remember it." She looked up, defensive already. "Mom, you signed it. Nobody forced you." "I signed it under pressure. In a room where they spoke louder than my heart." Her mouth opened, then closed. She reached for her glass. Took a long sip. "You said you were okay with it." I pulled out the folder and laid one paper on the table. My original deed. My name, in bold ink. "This says different." She stared at it like it was cursed. "Where'd you get that?" "It never left this house." Kamaya stood up, grabbed her purse. "You don't get it. We were trying to keep things simple. For the family." "No," I said, standing too. "You were trying to keep me small. I'm done being quiet." She didn't slam the door, but her silence was louder than any goodbye. A few hours passed. Jarius came back, this time with Evelyn, a lawyer built like truth. Older, calm, eyes sharp as cut glass. She laid out the legal options like a sermon. Short, clear, final. "We draft a formal demand," she said, "to reverse the transfer. Acknowledge your ownership. This isn't revenge, it's repair." Still, I hesitated. "Feels like I'm choosing war." She nodded. "Justice ain't always peaceful, but it don't have to be loud either. Sign with calm, but mean it." So I did, pen pressed firm, my signature solid. The late afternoon sun was leaning toward dusk when I saw Mars' truck pull in the driveway. He walked up slow, carrying a box that looked older than both of us. "Found this in the garage," he said, setting it on the couch. Inside, my old military papers. Folded neatly, my bronze star, letters from commanders, medals I hadn't seen in decades. I held the citation, my name etched deep. "They took my name off everything else," I whispered, "but not this." Mars didn't say much, just nodded. Because he knew. That night, I didn't just sign papers. I drew the line. The ballroom sparkled like a diamond under lights, crystal chandeliers, mirrored walls, stringed music drifting in the air, guests in silks and suits milled about, laughing, greeting, posing, everyone polished. I took a breath. They rolled out the red carpet for all except me. But tonight, I would walk it anyway. Mars stood at my side in his military dress uniform. His medals caught the glow of the lights. Shimmering, I cradled my purse against my side. It held more than lipstick tonight. It held the proof that they lost more than they thought. Langston mounted the platform first. He tapped the microphone, cleared his throat. "Welcome, family and friends. Tonight we celebrate legacy, unity, and the future we build together." He nodded to many, called out names, thanked people. When he mentioned me, it was perfunctory. "Sandra. Part of the foundation." Guests murmured. I felt a flush of heat, not shame, but something like cold fire. I rose from my seat, walking forward quietly. Somewhere in the hush, a spotlight struck the stage. I stepped into the light. Modest dress, no jewelry except what I'd earned. Yet everything shifted. The chatter dimmed, eyes found me. Then Mars joined me. He climbed up on stage behind me. The room tilted. He took off his jacket. First glance, crisp uniform. Then he let it fall. Beneath, his medals, the bronze star, service ribbons, laid bare. Gasps filled the air. "I am not your driver," he said, voice steady. "I was her brother in arms." The words landed like a shot. He spoke then, not at length, but meaning. He told the audience that he and my husband had served together, how my husband had saved his life in combat. Bonds deeper than any boardroom contract. The room stilled. Langston's face paled. He attempted defense. I invited him as a guest." "I had no idea," his voice cracked. I held up my hand. "You never invited my truth." Then I poured out what I carried. Documents. The original deed. The letters. Mars' statement of service. I slid them across the podium. They erased my name. I return it with interest. The cameras flashed. Murmurs rose. Faces shifted uncomfortably. A few guests backed away. Some stared wide-eyed. Langston, caught in his own show, had nowhere to hide. I left the stage slowly. Head high. Mars followed. In the crowd, I saw Kamaya, tears in her eyes. Throat tight. Langston remained frozen, mouth open, undone before them all. The room had changed, and so had I. I slowed my breath before stepping from the car. The gala entrance loomed before me, massive doors, glittering lights, cameras already trained like eyes hunting for weakness. I straightened my jacket, felt the weight of my pin against my chest. This suit wasn't just clothing, it was armor. Mars stood beside me, metals catching flashes of light as he moved. Reporters leaned forward, murmurs rose. I steadied my jaw and walked forward. They set boundaries for me. Tonight I walk through doors built for me. Cameras flared when I entered. Guests paused in mid-conversation. Forks hovering. I made no apology for being visible. The ballroom glowed, crystal chandeliers, polished floors, gold accents, every face dressed to impress. But the eyes on me weren't polite. They were tests. Langston stepped into the center. Microphone in hand, perfectly poised. Welcome, family, friends, distinguished guests, he began. Tonight we honor unity, dignity, legacy. He nodded toward me. And we celebrate Sandra Jenkins, an essential part of what built this house. Polite applause followed. He paused, then announced. To cement her contributions, we announce the Sandra Jenkins Foundation, to carry forward her values. That was my cue. The room stilled. Cameras swiveled toward me. I don't need a foundation named after me, I said sharply. I need my name recognized. Langston froze. Surprise cracked his carefully practiced face. The crowd held its breath. He attempted recovery. Sandra, that's a generous gesture. I raised my hand. Generous? Or controlling? You brand me to suit your story. I refuse that. Silence spread. The lights dimmed. Mars reached behind the podium and projected slides. Documents, deeds, signatures, copies showing erasures. Then audio. Kamaya's voice. Dad told me that if Mom signed it, everything would be smoother. She confessed. He said she'd understand. The clip ended. The crowd gasped. Langston's face drained. His voice cracked. That's taken out of context. Kamaya rose, tears in her eyes. No, it's not. I said it. The control Langston held cracked visibly. He opened his mouth, then shut it. I stepped forward. You built your empire by erasing those who laid its foundation. Tonight, we rebuild truth. I grabbed the charter for the foundation. Slowly ripped it in half. The paper tore. The sound echoed. Mars stood behind me like a wall. Media cameras flashed wildly. I looked at Langston. You don't rewrite legacy by naming it after someone. You restore it by honoring what's real. Applause swelled. Not polite. Not staged. But hard-earned. I walked off the podium. In the hallway, I found Kamaya waiting. Her makeup faded. Tears stained. I didn't want this fight, she whispered. You never had a choice. I replied softly. But now you do. She nodded. Outside, through the window, I saw Langston, frozen, watching. Tonight, I roared. He heard me. I never expected peace to feel so unfamiliar. It crept in slowly, like a sound you don't notice until it's louder than the noise it replaced. Weeks had passed since the gala. The storm had moved on. But inside me, something new had settled. I sat at the kitchen table one morning. The light just barely stretching across the floor. My shoulders didn't ache like they used to. My jaw wasn't clenched, and for the first time in longer than I cared to admit. I'd slept straight through the night. That alone felt like a revolution. Coffee in hand, I began flipping through letters, real, handwritten ones. Women who had seen my story online, in the paper, on the evening news. Women who saw something in my voice that sounded like their own. They wrote about daughters who no longer called. Husbands who cut their confidence down one sigh at a time. Churches that kept secrets and smiled through it. I read every word. I cried through some. I started a journal, not for myself, but for them. Their stories deserved a witness. The house didn't echo like it used to. Kamaya started coming around again. Not every day, but enough to make the silence feel less permanent. Sometimes we just sat in the living room, folding laundry, not talking. Other times, she'd bring groceries, or we'd watch old movies. Neither of us saying what needed to be said, but knowing it sat in the air between us. Then one day, standing at my sink, Kamaya asked, "Would you come speak at my therapy group?" I looked at her. She wasn't asking for me to fix anything. She wasn't dragging me somewhere to save face. She was opening a door. I nodded. "Yeah, I'll go." The community center wasn't fancy, just old chairs, brown carpet, a coffee machine that hissed more than it brewed. But the room held weight. Women filled the circle, most of them my age or older. Some looked like they hadn't spoken in months. Others looked like they hadn't stopped speaking in years. Just hadn't been heard. I cleared my throat. "I'm not here to tell you about pain. Pain's got its own voice. It doesn't need mine." A few chuckled quietly. I went on. "What I will say is this. Healing's not a straight road. Forgiveness? That ain't free. It's something you build, like a quilt, piece by piece, out of what's left after the tearing." Heads nodded. Some women wiped their eyes. Others sat still like stone. That room didn't need fixing. It needed remembering. And I remembered with them. Mars stood in the back, quiet, watching. That man had been through his own war. And here he was, proud of me like I'd earned a medal just by surviving. Later that week, I was picking up a pie from the store when someone called my name. I turned around and saw Dolores, Langston's sister. We hadn't spoken in years. She walked up slowly, her voice low but sure. "You burned what needed to be burned," she said. "Now we can build truth on clean soil." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. "Sometimes, that's enough." That evening, Kamaya came over with a box. She placed it in front of me and sat down. No build-up, just calm. "I found this in Dad's study," she said. "I think it's yours." Inside was a ring, small, gold, worn, my grandmother's. I hadn't seen it since I was a girl. My name was supposed to carry it. But like so many things, it had been locked away. I slipped it on. It fit like it never left. Dinner that Sunday wasn't about celebration, just presents. A few neighbors came by. Some women from the group. Mars, Kamaya. We ate off mismatched plates. Passed cornbread like communion. No one raised voices. No one raised guards. I stood at the table, glass in hand. They once tried to silence me. But I've learned, silence is a choice. I won't choose it again. Laughter rippled through the room. Mine was loudest. Toward the end, a little girl, maybe 7, tugged at my sleeve. "Can I call you Grandma S?" I blinked, then smiled so wide my cheeks hurt. "Of course, baby." Later that night, after the dishes were done and the house grew quiet again, I made my way to my bedroom. The air felt lighter, almost like the house had taken a deep breath. But there on my bed was an envelope. No return address. My name in handwriting I hadn't seen in decades. I stared at it a long time. Then I opened it. My hands stopped moving halfway through the first line. Whatever I thought was finished, some part of it had just begun.